There's a certain expectation in conflict. When someone wrongs you, they expect retaliation. They expect words, anger, justification, because that gives them control. If you react, you're playing their game. You're still emotionally invested, still engaging, still feeding them. But what happens when you give them nothing? When you choose silence? That is when the real suffering begins. Because people who manipulate, people who lie, people who betray, they don't fear your words. They fear your absence. They fear a world where they no longer matter to you, where their actions no longer provoke a response. And when you walk away, when you refuse to fight their battles, you leave them with the one thing they cannot escape: themselves. There's a certain expectation in conflict. When someone wrongs you, they expect retaliation. They expect words, anger, justification, because that gives them control. If you react, you're playing their game. You're still emotionally invested, still engaging, still feeding them. They rely on that. They count on it. Because as long as you are responding, as long as you are arguing, as long as you are trying to make them see what they have done, they still have power over you. They still have a role in your mind, a place in your emotions. But what happens when you give them nothing? What happens when you choose silence? That is when the real suffering begins. Because people who manipulate, people who lie, people who betray, they don't fear your words. They fear your absence. They fear a world where they no longer matter to you, where their actions no longer provoke a response, where you no longer spend your time trying to make sense of their behavior, trying to get them to understand. That is what shakes them to their core. Because if you're not fighting back, if you're not pleading, if you're not explaining, what does that mean? It means you've stepped outside of their control. It means they don't hold a place in your life anymore. And when you walk away, when you refuse to fight their battles, when you choose silence instead of reaction, you leave them with the one thing they cannot escape: themselves. That is what haunts them. That is what eats away at them. Because as long as they could argue with you, as long as they could provoke you, they could avoid looking at the truth of who they are. They could convince themselves that they were right, that they were justified, that they had power. But when you remove yourself, when you refuse to play the game, they are left with only their own thoughts. And here's the thing about the human mind: it does not do well with unresolved tension. The mind craves certainty. It craves resolution. But when you choose silence, you deny them that. You leave them in uncertainty. You leave them questioning. At first, they tell themselves a story. They're just mad. They'll come back. They're trying to prove a point, but they'll break. They convince themselves that your silence is temporary, that it's just another stage of the conflict. But time has a way of exposing reality. As the days stretch into weeks, as the weeks stretch into months, something shifts. The confidence they once had begins to waver. The excuses they made for themselves begin to crack. And then the real questions start to creep in. Why aren't they reacting? Why aren't they fighting back? Why aren't they reaching out? And then, the most painful realization of all: what if they've moved on? What if I was the problem? What if I was the problem? You see, people who thrive on manipulation, on control, on toxicity, they never expect to lose access to you. They never consider the possibility that you will actually leave, that you will actually stop caring, that you will actually refuse to engage. They believe they can push you, hurt you, break you, and that you will always stay in the game. But when you walk away, when you give them nothing, that's when they feel the pain they never expected. That's when they feel the weight of their own actions. That's when they sit alone with the truth they spent so long avoiding. And make no mistake, that is suffering. That is real, agonizing suffering. Because when you are left alone with your own mind, with no one to blame, with no one to fight, with no one to twist reality for you, that is when you are truly forced to face yourself. And that is why silence is so powerful. That is why it is the greatest response you can give to someone who never valued your words in the first place. It is not weakness. It is not avoidance. It is strength. It is control. It is the ability to walk away from a game that you never needed to play. It is the ability to say, I do not need to prove anything to you. I do not need to fight for your understanding. I do not need your validation. And when they realize that, when they truly understand that they no longer have access to your thoughts, your emotions, your presence, that is when they will truly feel the pain. That is when they will finally understand what they have lost. Because in the end, the greatest punishment, the greatest revenge, is not anger, is not hatred, is not even exposing them. The greatest revenge is controlled over you. And once they realize that, once they see that you have truly moved beyond them, their suffering will begin. Because for the first time, they will have to face the one thing they have been running from all along, themselves. They never expected this. They never thought you would be the one to go silent. They assumed you would always be there, always reacting, always feeding into the chaos they created. People like this, they thrive on control. They need to know they have an effect on you. They need to hear your anger, your frustration, your pain, because it reassures them that they still have power over your emotions. But now there is nothing. No words, no explanations, no desperate attempts to make them understand. Just silence. And that silence is haunting them in a way they never anticipated. At first, they tell themselves a story. They're just mad. They'll come back. They're trying to prove a point. They're waiting for me to reach out so they can have the upper hand. They convince themselves that your silence is part of the game, that it's just another stage in the conflict. But something feels different this time, because days pass, then weeks, then months, and you are still gone. No texts, no calls, no attempts to reconnect. Suddenly, the confidence they once had begins to waver. The excuses they made for themselves begin to crack. The questions start creeping in, slowly at first, then all at once. Why aren't they reacting? Why aren't they fighting back? Why aren't they explaining themselves? And then, the most painful realization of all, what if they've moved on? What if they don't care anymore? What if I was the problem? You see, people like this, they never prepare for the possibility that you will actually leave. They think they can push you, manipulate you, break you, and you will always stay in the game, because that's how it's always been. Every time they started a fight, you responded. Every time they created drama, you tried to fix it. Every time they hurt you, you wanted them to understand what they had done. But now, you've taken all of that away. You've removed yourself completely. And suddenly, they are left with nothing but their own mind. And here's the thing about silence. It forces reflection. It forces introspection. It forces them to sit with their own actions, their own choices, their own mistakes. As long as they could argue with you, as long as they could twist the truth, as long as they could provoke a reaction, they could avoid facing themselves. But now there is no distraction, no one to shift the blame onto, no one to manipulate, just them, alone. And that is a terrifying place to be. They begin to replay every conversation, every moment, every time they dismissed you, every time they made you feel small. They think about the things they said, the way they treated you, and without your reaction to justify their actions, a deep unease starts to grow. They don't want to admit it, but something inside them knows they pushed too far this time. They thought you would never leave. They thought you needed them. But the truth is, they needed you. They needed your energy. They needed the validation of knowing they could still affect you. They needed to know they had a hold on you. And now, they have nothing, no power, no control, no influence over you. That realization is painful, more painful than any words you could have ever said to them, because it means they were wrong. It means they underestimated you. It means they lost something they never thought they would lose: access to you. And make no mistake, that is the greatest punishment. Not yelling, not arguing, not proving them wrong, just walking away, just choosing silence, just letting them sit in the empty space where your presence used to be. Because for the first time, they are feeling exactly what they made you feel, and they have no one to blame but themselves.